my most recent upload on Begotten and Created in time relative to Jesus as God's firstborn. Trinitarians have come to the channel, and I've been triggered, of course, by many of the comments and arguments I made. But they just don't have anything, huh? There's nothing they have to establish their eternal generation contradictory view, because they can't have a temporal view of the pre-human Jesus. Can't have it. So it's not an option. You understand, non-Trinitarians? The Trinitarians don't have that as an option. Otherwise, they wouldn't be Trinitarians. So it's important not to get too caught up with them. We let them kind of do their thing on some videos, but I mean, I had a conversation earlier, or a couple chat comments with a Trinitarian who's quoting to me Psalm 2, Psalm 2, 6, and 7, where it specifically in verse 6 refers to Jehovah setting his king on Mount Zion. And then in verse 7, how he has begotten him that day, figuratively, in the sense that that's the day he was born as the king installed by Jehovah, relative to the context under discussion. And so it is, even in a figurative application, right? No one believes, Trinitarians and non-Trinitarians don't believe that in Psalm 2, 6, and 7, that David being generated there, or begotten, means that that refers to his literal birth as a human. And if you do, any Trinitarians out there, go ahead and put it down, because you don't. And so to use that as a comparison, a false comparison really, to very obvious non-figurative contexts like John 1:18, only begotten God, where he's referred to as a God with God, through whom God made all things. So it's a context of literal creation, right? And in the context of literal creation, Trinitarians, he's the only begotten God. In the context of literal creation, Colossians 1:15, all things were made through him. He's the firstborn of all creation. It's not figurative. He's not the firstborn of the kings of the earth. You understand, Trinitarians? I know you do. When it comes to the figurative texts you point to, you just don't seem to be able to differentiate between figurative and literal and interpret things according to their context. Well, at least not when it's a problem for you. Same thing with Proverbs 8, right? The text that I cited, verse 21 and 25, that show the parallel usage of create and beget for wisdom in a context that is what? Literal creation. Before the mountains were made, before the hills were set down, when he laid the foundation of the earth, Trinitarians. Can you understand context, Trinitarians? It doesn't seem like it when you look at the comments in my chat on my Begotten versus Created Part 4 video. So I'm wondering, what is your problem? Why are you having such a hard time recognizing the figurative application of beget to David in Psalm 2, which is still temporal? There is not one single usage of beget or begotten or generate that is in any way associated with eternality. It's such a ridiculous notion. Only the Trinitarians could come up with it, right? Because they have to. They don't have a choice. Their choice is to not believe in the Trinity. They're not going to do that at this point, right? They're committed, right? At least many of them, somewhat. Either way, if that's what you have to worship the biblical God, go for it. But your whole concept of eternal generation is nonsense. It's not biblical. It contradicts the Bible. And it shows you invalidate the Bible with your traditions. And so it's just pathetic in every way that you keep trying to invalidate the biblical texts that make it explicit in a literal context that Jesus is the firstborn of God, firstborn of all creation, only begotten God, the one whom Jehovah made as the beginning, RK, of his way, Proverbs 8:21, Revelation 3:14, arche of all creation by God. Right? Just like in Colossians 1:15, it's not the Son making anything. And so it's just, I feel so sorry for you Trinitarians that are left in this position by your scholars and theologians, right? You've been told repeatedly that we're heretics and we're promoting a non-biblical view of Jesus while you have the right view, when we know that's not true, because we can just point to the text and show you. You can't do that. You cannot point to a text and show us eternal generation, Trinitarians. Not possible, because it's not possible. It's just something you made up to try to protect something that's not possible or true. Either way, that's on you. You have nothing. Not one single text that uses generation or any form of it in an eternal sense. The very idea that you would find that is absurd. But you guys believe it so much, you would think it's there somewhere, right? No, it's not. It's not anywhere. And you come here and you try to cite a text from Psalm 2 that's figurative, apply it to a literal context, false comparison, and even then, you've got temporality. You've got temporality in every single use of generation in the biblical text, figurative or non-figurative. Sorry. You just don't have the figurative applications of create, beget, only begotten, firstborn, arche, son, for the one that we're talking about. We do. We have all of these texts that use beget and create in parallel sequence, use firstborn in the context of literal creation, only begotten in the context of literal creation, beginning of his way, arche, literal creation. We got it all. You have nothing. And I know that's a difficult reality to face. I understand. That's why I try to accommodate you guys, so you don't lose your faith and totally abandon Christianity when you realize one day you've been teaching traditions in place of the biblical text. You're not supposed to do that. You know you're supposed to teach the text. All right. So I wanted to kind of go over that a little bit because the Trinitarians are going nuts a little bit on my comments on the Beget Create video. And that's okay. It's not always bad. It's not always nuts in a bad way. They're just very active, right? They feel threatened. And they should in a theological sense because they have been threatening all of us for centuries and even persecuting non-Trinitarians for centuries. So we've had it. We're done. We're no longer going to allow the Trinitarians to pretend like they have the right doctrine about God and the Christ. They don't. It's very obvious if you just read the Bible without the Trinity. You do that, you're never going to come up with the Trinity because it's not in the Bible. You're never going to come up with eternal generation, not in the Bible. You will come up with generation that's in the Bible, but it's the same as creation. And so we use the Bible. We encourage you to do the same. But if you're going to comment on things that I put up or arguments that I make, don't embarrass yourselves. I mean, I feel bad for some of you because you're writing things and I'm looking at them and I'm thinking, what do I say here, right? How do I approach this comment and not ruin their faith and yet still stand up for mine? That's the problem you create for us, this constant fighting that you do and that you're not supposed to do, especially not for teachings and beliefs that are not clearly taught in these texts. And if you're going to try to make them associate with these texts, then you need to make proper comparisons, right? Not make figurative comparisons to literal applications. And these Trinitarians that run around and like to say, oh, firstborn, only begotten, those are all figurative for the Christ, for the pre-human Jesus. Who is God's firstborn then, Trinitarians? Who is it? It's not the pre-human word. It's not the only begotten God. It's not the one who's actually called firstborn. Who is it? You mean to tell me that the firstborn of God, the real firstborn, is not known? And that a non-created being is given the actual firstborn's title? For what? For what reason? Given the prominence that the firstborn has in the Bible, Deuteronomy 21:17, you would think we would know who the real firstborn of God is. And we do. You don't. So we feel sorry for you in that respect because it's not hard to see. You just don't want to believe. And so it doesn't matter what you see. It matters what you believe. And with that in mind, let's go ahead and let's get to our show. So I wanted to make those comments because I had a little bit of an interaction with a Trinitarian earlier today. And you can go to the video I put up, part 4, Beget, Created, Time. And so you'll see what I'm talking about. But it's just, it strikes me that they're not really paying attention, right? And I'm wasting my time correcting them in these very basic elements of how you interpret the Bible and how you make comparisons. So that's not what I want to spend my time for, Trinitarians. Why don't you take some time, find some examples if you can, that show us your eternal generation, because you can't. You thought you could do that because you thought you had John 1:1 outside of time. You don't. And you never did. So much for eternal generation.